Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again with another starter build video. Another few just small sort of off meta. Well, they're kind of meta, but they're the things that other people probably wouldn't be recommending for you. So if you want something a little different and probably a bit tougher, then one of these builds might be for you. One of them I will definitely be starting myself, and I'm actually currently torn between two of them, but I think I'm going to go towards the Ice Shot. The other one I've got is Spectral Throw, Elemental Buzzsaw, and then Volcanic Fissure Berserker. But yeah, as always, starter builds, they're not supposed to be anything too massive, somewhat simple, somewhat getting you through the game without too much currency, hopefully ramping a little bit into endgame. If your goal is to, for some reason, tackle Uber bosses by day 2 or 3 of the league or some shit, you probably don't need to be looking at starter builds from people. You need to be making your own build. Otherwise, yeah, look, Uber's super endgame, doesn't matter. Most of these builds, most of your starter ambitions should just be getting a character off the ground into maps, completing your atlas, and setting yourself up for bigger and better ventures throughout the league. So with that, let me rip into the first character for Crucible League for a starter, probably the one I'm going to be playing, and that is Ice Shot Deadeye. Ice Shot hasn't really changed too much in quite a while, but it does have a new Val skill, and the Val skill looks very fancy in that it's going to have a few extra clones of yourself whenever you press it that should aid in your single target endeavors. It'll probably also give you quite a bit of extra clear, but with totems at your side and all the additional projectiles you can get from the tree now, as well as with Deadeye, clear shouldn't really be an issue. But hopefully the Val Ice Shot is something that helps us with single target, because bows notoriously are okay to level and start out with, but really start to struggle, especially on single target around yellow maps, something like that. At the moment, I think bows have been buffed enough times, and the entire bow archetype buffed enough times in recent times that they are pretty good, but no one really plays them still because there's better options. I did a quick test run of this starter on standard today, and I will link you the VOD as well so you can reference it for leveling purposes if you really want to. I did a test run and it felt really good. It was super fast, super clean. If you just spec into the non-crit side of things with precise techniques, something like that, it levels real nice. Like, I shot all the way from level 1 to 70 through the campaign, 0 gear, 0 troubles. Would highly recommend. Of course, subbing in Lightning Arrow in the exact same setup, probably going to be a faster campaign clear, but that's neither here nor there. If you want to play Ice Shot, you play some Ice Shot. So let me go over real quick what the build looks like and what it might look like in a slightly more end game fashion. So the first little tree is what basically I got up to today on the level test, up to level 60, pure leveling setup, and it's something that you're probably going to be respecing out of buy around maps, something like that, because it's a non-crit setup, and essentially you just stay in the entire ranger area. There's a lot of good juicy damage in the ranger area, and we move into Deadeye as soon as we can for an ascendancy. But basically you go through a bit of the damage nodes, you get these damage nodes through the life into these damage. You then got a few choices you can make. You can either start getting towards life, but I went straight towards precise technique. That is 40% more attack damage if your accuracy is higher than life, and then you never deal crits. So typically throughout the campaign, like the first 10 acts, you're not going to be critting, you're not going to be building towards crit, so you can just get rid of your crits, get 40% more attack, but be careful, make sure that your accuracy rating is pretty much always above your life total. Otherwise you might level up, remove a piece of gear, something like that, and notice that you have lost 40% more damage. So make sure you're keeping an eye on your life and speccing accuracy if you need to, things like that. This is something we're going to get rid of and then become crit eventually, but for now we grab that. I went 3 points into here and got 20 area. A bit of area on Ice Shot feels kind of nice. It helps you with a bit of extra clear. I then probably didn't yet do the mark stuff because wasn't really caring too much about that. I think I went down and started. At this point you start going towards your additional projectile, your other additional projectile, and hopefully you have done your normal lab and you can make an actual real decision here. There's no right answer. Tailwind just makes you a bit faster throughout the entire campaign. You can have better single target. You can have better sort of ranged clear. But I went for my first 2 points into Chain, which is probably not something we're going to do in late game. But for just clearing, act farming, doing the campaign, Chain felt really good. So all of a sudden my 3 or 5 proj, whatever, were chaining all over the place, and clear felt quite a bit nicer. This does nothing for single target, but it didn't seem to matter. My single target was good enough. I then went to the 2 projectiles for Cruel Lab, and at that point I could drop LMP or GMP, whatever I'm using at that point. I can be running 3 proj. Once I get into a 4th proj and then a 5th proj, with the Deadeye, we no longer need any additional projectiles, and we are absolutely farming. The idea of the build that I'm putting together here is to not be running Barrage on our single target, but maybe that's what we have to do in the end game, because there's no real Barrage synergy with a Val Ice Shot, but this is what it currently looks like. In the end game, we are probably going to be running Vengeance Cascade. Try that out. Apparently, it's going to be pretty strong, which means that the actual Ascendancy is going to look more something like that without Chain. For now, though, Chain feels pretty good, and I've just been speccing some good damage nodes and keeping it pretty clean. The gear, like, really nothing. You're just picking up fizz bows or lightning, fire, cold, doesn't matter as long as it's got some damage on it. Wasn't even like caring about gear for the most part on any of the character. And then ultimately, once you start going towards crit and want to do a crit respec, because you've got enough points to validate a crit existence, that's possibly what the end game build is going to look like. I don't yet know exactly how I'm going to build this. It might be like Ice Bite and going into frenzies, lots of flat cold. It might be a fizz perspective, might be like a tri-Ellie perspective with Trinity, but I think I'm going to start this character and then you can kind of play along with how I'm going to do it as well. I do have a bigger template from last league of a pure bow character if you'd like to look at that, and that is during, God, what was the league we just then did? Sanctum League. So if you look at the Sanctum League that I just then posted all my characters through in the build list, the character you can have a look at for a template is Volcanic Deadeye. The tree is kind of, I think, a fairly fleshed out good bow character tree, but this one is more tailored towards pure lightning since it's lightning and Voltaxic. It had a lot of damage in the end, and one thing you can easily do to fix single target, I think, on pretty much any bow build is chuck in a Storm Rain, a focused ballista totem, and Storm Rain single target is pretty damn insane with a totem setup and focused ballista. So keep that in mind if you feel like you're really running out of single target, especially in end game. But yeah, I think I'll start this one if I can pull the trigger on it, but looks like bow starters should be kind of fun. The next little starter is something that just got a slight buff, but I still believe is a fun and strong enough build worthy of starting, and it's something I was strongly considering starting once again, even though I've done multiple times, and that is Spectral Throw or Elemental Buzzsaw. So the patch this time around is giving the hit rate just a slight buff, so when Spectral Throw like goes towards its apex, it turns a few times and it means it can hit the enemy a couple times. At the moment it's something like 3 times before it turns back. This buff should theoretically get it up to like 4 hits sometimes. I'm not quite sure what that means for Sniper's Mark interaction and a lot of like just stuff in general with Spectral Throw, but I do think it's going to be slightly better overall. Either way, Spectral Throw still pretty close to my heart, and I think it's still a very decent starter that can ramp into endgame. I started it almost a year ago, I think it was, during Sentinel League, as a just fresh character going sort of lightning and cold damage, Trinity, and then potentially going into deck stacking in the end, but I stuck to just the starter build, going just lightning and cold with some Trinity action, nothing too special, and it actually went through and killed several of the Uber bosses before I moved on to my next character. So this starter can definitely go all the way. It's slightly different from before, just because you're not going to be using Divine Blessing anymore, but there's a few other things that are better. So overall, it's a mixed bag. It's some positives and minuses, but I do think Spectral Throw, once it ramps, especially as a Deadeye, becomes one of the nicer feeling builds out there. You're a very zappy playstyle, you have all the extra proj from Deadeye, so you don't have to use an LMP or a GMP, and ultimately it fixes single target with Sniper's Mark, and then gives you a very nice ranged playstyle. And on top of that, there's now going to be instant leech from the claw wheel and from the leech wheels, so that might make us a bit more durable here or there, but we might lose a bit of evasion, not too sure. Either way, the goal is probably going to be to convert into dex stacking now that you have Hand of Thought and Motion, which are going to be dex stacking claws as lightning bases. Really depends on how hard they're going to be to get, but that would be the goal, and even at a low amount of dex, like 1,000, it's probably going to outscale whatever you're going to be doing with Trinity and all that. Either way, there are a couple of videos from the Sentinel League when I was doing this for reference. Absolutely go to those if you're going to do something like this. You can also start with Frostblades on this build. You can start with Cobralash. Pretty much anything in the generic attack-based wheelhouse works, but Frostblades works pretty well if you're not feeling the Spectral Throw until you get all of the ascendancy points and all the stuff from the tree. It does struggle a little bit sometimes, I feel, but once it comes together, it feels pretty damn good. So like I said, going back in time to the Sentinel videos and starters is probably for the best. I've mimicked essentially those starter trees, but there's a starter, there's the one that I ended up building on Sentinel, and then there's the deck stacking full endgame version that was the League before, which you probably won't be copying in the exact way, especially since we're going to probably try and use Hand of Thought and Motion claws instead, but this is something just for reference as a full endgame build. The start is pretty simplistic, just going for Trinity and all kinds of, you know, basic mods just to get the character up and rolling. But the tree these days currently should be incorporating that for the additional proj. So ideally, I think just Deadeye by itself, 2 additional proj feels really good, and then you're shooting out 3 projectiles, but you still kind of want an extra 1 or 2, so you can get an extra 1 here. This cluster isn't really going to be too necessary these days. You can get rid of it, but if you can get a good one with Fan of Blades, that's fine. Otherwise, you're going to be gunning for a Divergent Spectral Throw, so that's going to be another extra projectile at the cost of 10 attack speed, but it should be worth it. At that point, you're firing off 5 projectiles, and your clear becomes pretty damn insane. That paired with Sniper's Mark becomes really quite crazy for clear, for single target, for visuals, and that's when the build comes together. So there's no real strict way of going about this. You can stick to GMP, like multiple projectiles and stuff, for as long as you want, but I'd probably be going into Fast Shot, then into Endless Munitions, then into Focal Point, and then into Tailwind. I think just getting a bit faster is the least important thing of the lot. As far as actually speccing the character, there's nothing too strict. Like, you are, for most ranges, most likely going through these nodes early on and then speccing out of them later if you really don't need them. So we'd go through these, we'd probably go through here, and then go straight up and try and get the additional proj. You're probably going to go claws as soon as possible, maybe spec into these, and you can immediately get 25 life gained on your main hand and mana on your offhand, and that will sustain you for most of the campaign, because that's a very powerful life gain on hit early on. But ultimately we are going for the elusive. The elusive did get a bit worse with Nightblade, unfortunately, since you can't reset it, but I think it's still pretty worth doing, and that should make for an okay build. So that's the starter template. We then have the mid one that essentially I completed during Sentinel, and this is the one that ended up killing some uber bosses and stuff. And then yeah, there's only one real difference here, where Shroud of the Lightless is no longer what this is anymore. It's going to be a bit different. Maybe it's more worth using, but you're probably going to be looking for a different chest at this stage. And then, of course, the endgame version will give you that as well. It's mostly just a reference point to see what a proper endgame deck stack could look like, but it's going to have to look somewhat different in modern days. And then lastly, this one is a bit provisional. I haven't played this exact version of the build, but I played Volcanic Fissure last league, and it was my build of the league. It was a very good skill, something I enjoyed, where I thought a lot of people built it a bit differently and not to its strengths. I think you want to go much faster on its attacks, focus less on the slower, slammier side of things. And I built it as a Raider deck stack. You really can't replicate that very easily, or maybe even at all anymore. So I've tried to give it another option in the form of Berserker and just sort of Fizz with a bit of flat fire scaling, Doriani Catalyst, so hopefully something pretty achievable early on just by killing some Atziris. But it's just a Berserker, so it should maintain some level of DPS similar to this one, maybe about half or a third of the DPS, but it's going to be a bit squishier. I've still tried to build in some instant leech and a decent enough life pool, but you might be dying on this one more than something like this character was going to be doing. This character was an absolute beast where it was hardcore viable through almost every encounter in the game, only died to like one Uber or some shit like that. It's a very good skill, and I've tried my best to just put together a budget version. I think an endgame version with a similar build that I'm going to give you is a strength stack version with Brutus Lead Sprinkler, so that's something you might be able to build into once you've completed just a basic level of gearing on this character. But I can't promise anything for this. I just want to make sure there's a Volcanic Fissure out there for you to copy if you want to start with it, because I don't think too many people are singing its praises. So let me show you real quick what the Berserker version looks like, and go from there. So this is one I've quickly put together. Like I said, it's revolving around Doriani Catalyst, pretty basic scepter, just decent fizz, attack speed, a bit of LE damage, dual wielding, and the tree is going a bit all over the place because you do want to get point blank, you want to get some mark mastery, we're trying to get some crit. I think ever since they changed the Volcanic Fissure ball to interact with slower projectiles, I do think it's going to be a good single target increase to get reduced proj speed and then also less proj speed mastery. So we kind of went over here just to make sure that all of our balls are going to be overlapping. You can see our Ground Fissure does a decent bit of damage, and then Magma balls do a decent bit of damage, but that should be per individual ball, and that means that there's quite a lot more damage in that than it otherwise looks. Nothing fancy about the defense here. You can incorporate defense if you really need to, but it should be good enough that you have a decent amount of damage, decent amount of life pool, and then a good bit of instant leech on top of all of our just fortify, I suppose. That's about it. But yeah, it's a pretty basic version. That's all it really is. A Brutus Lead Sprinkler with strength stack, I think, is the end game play for a build like this. So Brutus Lead Sprinkler, bunch of strength. I've got a few examples in the past that you can look at for how to build one of those, but it's just not immediately accessible to get all the right strength gear, but it should outscale something like this quite easily in the end game. The only challenge of not doing a Raider, for example, is just making sure you're keeping up with your attack speed, because having no attack speed makes a build like this quite a bit less fun. But it is a Berserker, so it should have plenty of attack speed. You can go Blitz instead if you really want. You'd have to fix crit a whole bunch more, but I gave Rage as part of an option. 40% more damage, that's an absolute no-brainer. Then going towards Rage, then going towards the crit and damage. So this one's a bit more provisional, but if you're feeling risky and you want a melee build, I have played Glacial Hammer and Smite and Frozen Legion in the past league. I think they can all definitely be starters as well, but wasn't really going to revamp them, and they don't necessarily feel as good off of slow attack speed. So that's what that is for now, and as well as that, I'll link a POB of just a Spellslinger Inquisitor, which Blackjack King viewer for us made. It's just a basic setup, and I do think Spellslinger's in a good place at the moment. It's a bit underrated, but it is a bit harder to start. You just basically, with something like this, you would start with Rolling Magma, leveling for as long as you can, as long as you want, and then once you're ready to go into Spellslinger, start equipping Spellslinger, have two different spells, in this case Ice Spear and Magma, rolling magma, and then start attacking with frenzy, and it should feel pretty damn good. Especially as an Inquisitor, it's pretty slept on, but Battle Mage stacks with Spellslinger for your wand damage applying to your spells. It's really quite powerful. And like I said, I think Spellslinger is a bit underrated at the moment. Of course, people have been looking at it and talking about it with trigger bots, but I don't know if that's the right play early on, because having to fix mana is going to be a bit of an issue. It's certainly doable, but I'm not really convinced it's going to be comfortable as a starter. So I'll give you that as well. But yeah, that's all for the starters for now. I'm probably going to do Ice Shot, lead the way with a bow starter. If it sucks by end game, oh well, you know, we had a shot, and it'll definitely be fun throughout the campaign and early maps. But for now, I've got a few more cosplay things to do. I'll be up in a few more hours, get a couple hours sleep, and we'll kick into the Crucible League. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you guys have a good league start, and see you next time.